In today's video, I'm going to talk about how to overcome defensiveness. So, defensiveness is a defense mechanism that comes up usually when we feel blamed, attacked, or criticized. So, when defensiveness comes up, it really blocks communication and it blocks your ability to really hear what the other person is saying. So, I'm going to start talking a little bit more about what defensiveness is, the behavioral part of it, and the psychological part of it. And then I'm going to go into some practical strategies to help overcome defensiveness so you can recognize when it comes up, but you're not going through the same motion of feeling that internal struggle or that internal criticism. And instead, you can choose a better way to respond. And as a result, you'll notice your communication will improve, all your relationships will improve, and you'll get to learn about yourself. So let's dive in. Defensiveness is a reaction to feeling blamed, attacked, or criticized. And it's a self-protection measure. What it's doing is it's making this energetic wall come up that really blocks any new information to come in. So if someone tells us something about ourselves, a lot of times we might just feel that attack, even if the person is not intending to. So one of the key pieces here is it's a perceived attack, a perceived threat, or perceived blame. And so just because the other person is reflecting to you something that they see or noticed or giving you some sort of feedback, when we have a defense mechanism that comes up and we feel on the defense immediately, that's telling you that there's probably some sort of insecurity or injury or trauma or belief of insecurity or lack of confidence that's within you that then is building this self-protected wall that comes up. So to say it again, defensiveness is a behavioral and psychological self-protection mechanism that comes up when there's a perceived threat, attack, or criticism. Now, that's what defensiveness is. And as a result of defensiveness, you might notice that you're not getting clear feedback about what you really need to look at or what you really want to learn about yourself. And it's also stopping relationships from really growing. In order to grow, we need to hear feedback from the people that we trust and care about. Now, in my own life, there was a time where I was so hard on myself. I was so overly critical. And I really had this mask of perfectionism that if anyone told me I needed to improve upon something, it was just too much. And even though I could say and rationalize and logically say that person is trying to help me, internally, I felt like I had failed, that there was something so inadequate within me. And because I was getting this external feedback, they were proving a really deep fear that I had. And so that psychological reaction, that pain point is so important to overcome. And that's why I want to give you some specific strategies to help you first understand what is this defense mechanism related to? What really needs to be healed? And some practical in the moment strategies to take a step, to breathe, and to hear what the other person is saying. In addition to understanding what defensiveness is, let's talk about some main triggers. So main trigger points that we have within ourselves that if someone's touching on, we might bring that wall up immediately. So some of these common triggers can be criticism, fear of rejection, internal insecurities, or any part of you that you feel is inadequate, past pain or trauma, anytime your heart has been damaged. So any sort of emotional pain points can be a source of why the defensive mechanism comes up. When you feel deeply insecure or a fear of failure or that desire to be perfect, a lot of those points are what's going to be easily triggered when someone is giving you feedback. And so again, it's really important to know what your common triggers are. I did a video about understanding your triggers and how to overcome them. You can find it linked here. And that will give you a little bit more space and understanding about what triggers are and then what they're here to tell us. So all of us have certain triggers. And when we're aware of these and we understand them, then we're going to have much more knowledge when we're in a conversation with someone and we feel that defensiveness come up. We can choose a better response. We don't have to react with defensiveness because, like I've said, that defensiveness blocks off new information from coming in. And if you're in a relationship with someone, it really stops it from progressing because we need to be able to talk to each other. And sometimes the feedback we're giving isn't always the positive side. It's the sides that we need to work on. And so understanding your triggers is really important part of understanding this self-protection mechanism. Some behaviors that come up when you're feeling defensive. So I'm going to name them and you just reflect. Do you have any of these come up when a significant other, a family member, maybe a boss, supervisor comes to you and is giving you feedback? Do you have any sense of denial? So denial is when we are refusing to acknowledge or accept feedback or responsibility. Denial is like turning the cheek and not really focusing or allowing new information to come in. Then we have justification. So justification sometimes can be dressed up like rationality. So if we're getting feedback, we immediately jump to explain or express the intent that we had to the other person. But what that's actually doing is it's providing enough space and barrier from that new information to coming in that we're protecting ourselves. So I understand if you're talking to a loved one and they're telling you something and you want to just come in and rationalize or explain what it was that you were meaning to do, that has its place. But if you're just trying to take in information, allow the person to fully finish, to fully express what it is that they're saying, because sometimes defensiveness makes us pull out one thread when it's really not about this thread. It's about the whole thing that the person is weaving and trying to convey to you. Another behavior that comes up is a counterattack. So if I go to my husband and I say, you never clean up the kitchen, if he says, well, you never pick up the bedroom, that's a counterattack. And that is a really, really clear indicator that defensiveness is coming up. So ask yourself, when someone's giving you feedback, do you counterattack immediately? Do you try to put the other person in the spot of blame? And finally, we have withdrawal. So withdrawal is when we're trying to comfort ourselves and protect ourselves from any sort of emotional pain. And so we just leave the situation, we leave the room. And so practically speaking, this can look like me coming into the room, telling my husband he never cleans up the kitchen. And instead of even saying anything, he just leaves. This is one of the aspects that is actually the most damaging to a relationship, because what is that telling your partner? It's telling them that you just don't care. And you can understand on his side, maybe he just feels so defensive and he doesn't want to get in it, but that is going to prevent the relationship from getting better. What is that going to teach me? It's going to teach me he is not a safe space for me to talk about my feelings. I can't share the things that are in my mind because he can't handle it. That is the grounds for a lot of resentment and for a lot of contempt. So if you have any of these four, be really, really aware here. Ask yourself, do you have denial? Do you justify? Do you counterattack or do you withdraw? If you do any of these four things, it's a sign that you have a defensive strategy. And you need to look at, what are my triggers? What is this from? Understanding why it's there, and then having some practical strategies to overcome it. So now I'm going to explain those practical strategies. First, you want to have that self-awareness, like I've already explained. You want to be aware that you are defensive. So just being able to say, I'm defensive, I get defensive. When I was at that point in my life where I realized I could not handle any feedback, just being able to say, I am defensive or I am being defensive right now allowed me to have a little clarity about what it was that I needed to work on. So that self-awareness, that I'm being defensive and I'm working on changing it. So you want to be aware of what strategy or what way defensiveness comes up for you. So are you initially in denial? Is it the justification? Is it the counterattack? Is it withdrawal? Is it maybe all four of those? In what order? So that awareness. Like I said earlier, knowing your triggers, knowing that there's something in my past, there's something within myself, there's an insecurity or an unworthiness that's within me that is making any feedback really, really unsafe feeling. So knowing that self-awareness is really important. Now, we have to choose a better reaction. So I've talked about the ways that defensiveness manifests. And when you know you get defensive, then the next time someone's giving you feedback, you can have that voice in your head saying, okay, here's the test. It is time to respond in a better way. I'm choosing to not get defensive. So when there's a sense of you want to counterattack, hold yourself back. And maybe say to your partner, I'm working on not being defensive. So I'm wanting to jump on everything you're saying, but I'm going to take a step back. The strongest antidote to defensiveness is taking responsibility. So remember, you're not taking responsibility for every part of an argument or a fight. I don't want you to be inauthentic. But if you can take a step back and not be defensive and think to yourself, my partner's coming to me and trying to give me some feedback about what's bothering him, let me just listen to it. Even if I had no ill intent, even if there was a reason I didn't clean the bedroom, if I take a step back and just say, oh, my partner's disappointed about this, and I hear the whole story instead of just pulling out all the threads because I'm so sensitive to feeling triggered, to feeling uncomfortable, then I listen. And what happens is he feels heard, he feels understood, and he feels empathized with. Now, all of those things is what really grows a relationship and allows it to continue to progress. So take responsibility. Ask yourself, what can I say to my partner that makes them feel understood, even if I don't agree with the whole thing? You can find one sentiment where you say, I really understand why that would be disappointing. I'm sorry that I did anything to make you feel like I didn't care or I wasn't putting enough energy into the house. If you can just from your heart say that, that's going to take care of so much conflict. But when that defensiveness is there, it doesn't allow that to come forward. It's blocking it, which is why so many relationships end up dissatisfying because the empathy and the intimacy is lost because we have too many insecurities, too many defense mechanisms that come up. So taking responsibility, take out a piece of paper and write this down. Ask yourself, what areas do I get most defensive? And what are these connected to? And what would it look like if I took responsibility? If I stayed open to feedback and empathized or understood or sought to understand what the person who's giving me the feedback is trying to do? What would change? Being open, being mindful is the way out of defensiveness. Those are the practical ways in which you can start to listen and understand and take in new information that can help you grow. Or empathize, understand, and create greater connection and intimacy with your partner. We have to be able to handle feedback. And even if we have a voice in our head that says, that was not my intention, I meant to do it this way, it's okay to just pause. You know that. Give the partner space in order to convey fully what it is that they're talking about. Finally, you want to be able to be vulnerable. If you're talking to someone and you're feeling this sort of internal reaction and this desire to bring up the wall or to fight back or to withdraw, If you're vulnerable and say, I'm really working on not being so defensive, and this conversation's a little hard for me, so I just want you to know where I am with it, that is another way to build intimacy and connection. That builds trust. That's so great to communicate. Being vulnerable about where you need to work on allows you to actually put the shield down. Because when we feel like we have to be perfect or do everything the right way, when we have that fear of failure, that's actually like the source that defensiveness is feeding on. So the second you're just vulnerable and raw and authentic and open, you'll be surprised at how fast the defensiveness falls. And so take responsibility. Be aware of what your triggers are. Be aware of what conversations make you feel the most defensive. Understand where you need to be more mindful in your communication, where you need to take more responsibility, or what actions are adding to any sort of problem, and then adjust accordingly. And remember, all of this is a practice. And so it's okay if you move through this and you still feel like you're getting defensive. Measure progress through the incremental changes and not perfection. Defensiveness is there because it's trying to keep us safe from something. So the second you take responsibility for changing this and being vulnerable and being authentic and open and not feeling criticized, not wanting to counterattack, you'll see all of the relationships around you change. And not just the relationships to other people, but the relationship to yourself. So I hope you understand what defensiveness is, the common triggers that feed defensiveness, and some manifestations of how you know you're actually being defensive. If you apply some of these practical strategies, it's going to allow you to move through the response in a healthier way. And if you have a spot that you just can't shake, that's a sign that you might want to start working with a professional or get some healing, because sometimes we do have those blocks and it's just something that needs to be healed. That scar tissue needs to be cleaned up and then it can move again. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you have anyone that you think might benefit from it, please send, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.